I've lived on this land my whole life. My father built the original barn with his bare hands in the 70s, and it's where I now run a small rescue operation for livestock goats, chickens, ponies, even a couple of retired dairy cows. It's not a business, it's a mission. These animals have nowhere else to go, and I'm not the kind of man to look away when something helpless needs care. But ever since the HOA took over this stretch of land, after developers swooped in and built cookie-cutter homes next to my family farm, they've been trying to make me disappear. They said my barn was an eyesore, that my animals created odors and noise, and that my land wasn't in keeping with the aesthetics of the neighborhood. At first, it was just passive-aggressive letters. We kindly ask that you consider relocating your livestock to a more suitable area. One read. We understand your passion, but the community values uniformity. I ignored them. I wasn't part of their little club, and my land wasn't under their jurisdiction. Not legally, anyway. But that didn't stop them. Next came complaints too. Animal control. A surprise visit. Luckily, I keep things clean, impeccably so. The inspector apologized and left after 10 minutes. Then came the zoning board. They tried to twist rules, saying I was running a commercial enterprise. I proved otherwise. Again, nothing stuck, but I could tell they weren't done. The HOA president, a smug guy named Mark Turner, started showing up at the edge of my property. Arms crossed, staring silently like I was trespassing on his land. Once, he actually tried to enter without permission, said he wanted to take a look around for violations. I told him I'd call the sheriff, and he backed off, but barely. Then came the night, everything changed. It was a quiet Thursday. I'd gone into town for supplies, hay bales, feed, and fencing. By the time I got back, I saw the glow from a mile out. Not the warm orange of a sunrise. This was fire. My barn was up in flames. The goats had scattered. The chickens were crying. Out there, coop melting from the heat. I slammed the truck into gear and tore down the dirt road like a bat out of hell. By the time I reached the barn, it was already too late. I don't remember screaming, but my throat was raw the next morning, so I must have. The firefighters were there. Thank God one of my neighbors called them, but there was nothing to save. The main barn was a skeleton. The vet med shed was gone. The nursery pen where I'd been nursing a newborn calf. Ashes. I was numb, not angry, not yet, just hollow. The next day, the sheriff came by. The fire marshal said it was arson, accelerants. Someone had poured something through the hay bales and torched it. That's when the hollow turned to fury. And then came the kicker, a letter from the HOA, delivered to my mailbox the morning after. The fire, no condolences, no concern. Just a notice that, in light of recent events, we strongly encourage the removal of any remaining animals, as their presence no longer aligns with the neighborhood environment. That's when I knew they did this. Maybe not with their own hands, but someone from their side. It was too perfect, too opportunistic. The timing, the silence, and then that letter. They wanted to scare me, make me give up, make me sell, make way for their precious developments. But I don't scare easy. I slept in my truck that night, parked next to the ruins. I looked at my animals, huddled behind a makeshift fence, and made a promise out loud. They burned down my barn. Fine. Let's see how they like what comes next. Because what they didn't realize is that fire doesn't destroy people like me. It just clears the ground. The morning after the fire, my mind was already spinning not with grief, but with strategy. I wasn't just going to rebuild. I was going to fight back. But before I could act, I needed proof. I knew the fire wasn't an accident, and I knew deep in my gut that someone from the HOA either ordered it or looked the other way. So, I did something I'd never done before. I walked over to the clubhouse. It was HOA Central Clean Landscaping, polished concrete, and that ridiculous. Fountain out front they loved bragging about in their newsletters. Mark Turner was sitting inside by the big glass window, sipping coffee like he hadn't just destroyed a man's life. When he saw me, he had the nerve to smile. "You here to finally talk about selling?" he asked, not even standing up. I didn't take the bait. "You know what happened last night," I said. "You know exactly what that fire was." He blinked, then shrugged. "Tragic accident. Probably some old wiring, maybe a careless cigarette." "Shame, really?" "Really, that smugness it lit a fire hotter than the one that took my barn." "You think this is over?" I said, my voice low. "You started something you can't control." He just sipped his coffee again. "You can't prove anything. And frankly, that eyesore being gone is probably the best thing to happen to this neighborhood in years." That was it, the line, the confirmation. He knew. Maybe he hadn't lit the match, but he was behind it. And that meant he'd slip up. Eventually, it needed to be there when he did. I started digging. First, I installed trail cameras, real ones, not the fake ones people stick on their sheds. I placed them everywhere, the edge of my property, hidden in trees, even one pointing at the clubhouse from across the street. I also checked with my neighbor Rosa, who had a camera above her garage. Turns out, it caught a figure walking along the back fence line the night of the fire. The timestamp, 1:43 a.m. The shape, male, medium build, hoodie, and carrying what looked like a gas can. It wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough to start. Putting pressure on people, I made copies. I printed one and taped it to the clubhouse door with a note. "This man burned down my barn. Someone knows who it is. I'm not going away." Within 24 hours, the HOA held an emergency meeting. They tried to make it private, but word got out fast. Several neighbors, ones who never liked how the HOA ran things, showed up and demanded answers. Some even offered to testify that Turner had openly joked about getting rid of the farm. That's when cracks started to show. One of the board members, Cynthia, a nervous woman who always kept to herself, called me 2 days later. Said she didn't want to be involved anymore, that she didn't sign up for whatever this was turning into. I met her at the diner that night, and she spilled everything. Turner had been pushing the board for months to find a way to get rid of me. He hated the animals, hated the smell, hated that I never bowed to their little club. He said I was lowering property values. Cynthia said he mentioned accelerating the process, but she thought it was a figure of speech. She didn't think he meant arson. I recorded everything. Legally one-party consent state. Then I made copies again, sent them to the sheriff, the fire marshal, and the county board. But I wasn't done, because here's the thing. The HOA loved their precious clubhouse. It was their crown jewel. Yoga classes, HOA meetings, wine nights, even private parties. It had been renovated with member dues and donations. It sat right in the middle of the neighborhood, shiny and underused, and it was technically built on common ground county land on a long-term lease. I did my homework, and I found a clause in the original land use agreement. It's one that said if a building on that land went unused or was deemed unsuitable for community use, it could be repurposed by public request and county review. That was all I needed. I filed a petition, cited community abuse, attached photos of the burned barn, the statement from Cynthia, and the camera footage. I argued that since my rescue shelter had been destroyed by suspected HOA interference, and I had nowhere else to keep the livestock, they could either let my animals roam the neighborhood, or I could house them in the one building available. The clubhouse, at first, the petition was laughed at. Then the county saw the footage, heard the testimony. They didn't laugh anymore. I got conditional approval. The day I led the goats through the clubhouse doors was something I'll never forget. The floors were hardwood, so I laid down hay. The chickens went in what used to be the yoga room. The cows right in the event hall. The No Animals Allowed sign got replaced with one that read, Livestock Shelter, authorized by county. Order Turner tried to sue, tried to organize protests, but the board turned on him. The county opened an investigation into the HOA's management, and people started pulling their dues. Even residents who hated the animals more than anything didn't want to be tied to what the HOA had become. I didn't just catch the HOA with blood on their hands, used their own rules to expose them. And best of all, HOA animals were safe, warm, and legally protected. Right inside the heart of the neighborhood they tried so hard to beautify. When the news broke that the HOA clubhouse was officially repurposed as a livestock shelter, the neighborhood practically split in two. Half the residents were outraged furious that their shiny little gathering place now smelled like hay, goat, fur, and cow dung. The other half, they were quietly thrilled to see someone finally take the HOA down a peg. And me. I was sleeping better than I had in months. Of course, I didn't do it to be spiteful. Not entirely. My animals needed shelter. The barn was gone, and rebuilding would take months, permits, inspections, funds I didn't have. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel amazing to watch Mark. Turner walked past the clubhouse and nearly gagged at the scent of justice. He still strutted around like he was in charge, wearing his button-up shirts and Bluetooth headset like this was a corporate boardroom. But the board had stripped him of his title. After the Cynthia recording and the community outrage, they couldn't afford to have him as the face of the HOA anymore. He was just a regular resident now, and for the first time, he was the one being ignored. The animals settled in quickly. Chickens clucked around the old lounge. The goats had the back hallways all to themselves, where the yoga mats used to be. The cows stayed in the banquet room, formerly the heritage room, where the HOA held their wine and cheese mixers. I'd cleared out the furniture and lined the floors with hay and sawdust. I even set up a little petting corner for kids whose parents didn't mind letting them learn about animals up close. And you know what? The community started warming up to it. Little by little, kids would come by to feed the goats. Some parents, even the skeptical ones, started asking if their kids could volunteer after school. One man, a former Army vet who rarely left his house, walked by and said, "Smells like home," before patting a piglet on the head. Wow. That moment alone made it all worth it. Still, the HOA wasn't done fighting. They called Emergency Town. Halls, they sent letters to the county demanding the decision be reversed. They even tried bringing in their own inspectors, claiming the clubhouse was a health hazard. But every time they tried to shut me down, I handed over the paperwork, the permits, and the sheriff's contact info. And every time they were forced to back down. The funniest part? Some residents started thanking me. Never thought I'd say this. But this place finally feels like a community, one said. I was tired of the HOA telling me what color one could paint my mailbox, said another. You standing up to them gave the rest of us the guts to say no. And then came the real twist. One morning while feeding the chickens, I saw a group of HOA board members, former board members, now walking up the path. At first I braced myself, thinking they were here to yell or file some complaint. But they were holding coffee in paper bags. "Truce," one of them asked. "We brought muffins." Apparently, now that Turner was out, they wanted to distance themselves from the mess he left behind. They didn't agree with everything I'd done, but they admitted the HOA had overstepped badly. They offered to help fundraise for a new barn, even suggested turning the clubhouse into a permanent educational space. Something for school visits, local events, 4-H groups. A place where the animals could stay and the community could benefit. I nearly dropped a feed bucket from shock. After a long pause, I said, "If you're serious, you can help muck stalls first." They laughed. But 3 of them actually came back the next day in boots. As the weeks passed, things changed. Turner moved out quietly one night, with a moving truck that didn't even idle for 10 minutes. Word was, he sold the house at a loss and left town. No one threw a goodbye party. In fact, someone left a goat plushie on his mailbox the day he left. I'll never admit who it was. The barn fundraiser took off faster than I expected. Local news picked up the story. Farmer turns HOA clubhouse into livestock shelter after arson attack, and donations poured in. People mailed in supplies, money, even building materials. A contractor offered to help rebuild at cost. Within 6 weeks, the new barn was under construction, bigger, stronger, with a fireproof design and solar panels on the roof. But even with that progress, I didn't rush the animals out of the clubhouse. They'd earned that space. It had become symbolic proof that people don't always have to back down, even when systems are stacked against them. Proof that with the right pressure, the people in power can be made to answer. Eventually, I moved most of the animals back to the new barn. But I kept a few one-old goat named Bucket, 3 chickens, and a rescue pig named Daisy at the clubhouse. We turned that wing into an education center, just like the board suggested. The kids still come by, so do the seniors. Even the grumpiest HOA members can't help but smile when Daisy rolls over for belly scratches and me. I still look over at that building and feel a quiet sense of victory. Not because I won some petty feud, but because I stood up when they expected me to fold. Because I didn't let fear, fire, or fake authority erase who I am or what I stand for. They burned down my barn, so I turned their pride and joy into a sanctuary, and I wouldn't change a thing.